Zamfara State Governor meets President Buhari, expresses optimism to ending banditry.
I assured the people of Zamfara State that they will see changes very soon because I know what we discuss and I know what is going to happen.
Vice President Yemi Osinbajo inaugurates expanded partnership committee on sustainable blue economy.
National Assembly to reconvene plenary today after end of year's recess.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall continue our conversation on January 15th in Nigeria's history.
And no doubt Nigeria's history will be incomplete without the mention of January 15, 1966, a day that remains indelible in the minds of many Nigerians.
Of course, Kirian, on the 15th of January 1966, Nigeria, as it were, lost her innocence as the First Republic collapsed following the military coup led by 5 majors. Now, on the other hand, the day has also been set aside to be marked annually to honor fallen heroes and others who paid the supreme price in the service of the country.
And as a deliberate effort to remind Nigerians of the past with a view to learning from our mistakes, Good Morning Nigeria took up the issue on the eve of the Armed Forces Remembrance Day commemoration for 2022.
Yes, we assembled some distinguished Nigerians who saw it all one way or the other in terms of evaluating the January 15th saga in Nigeria's history.
The personalities described January 15, 1966 as the beginning of military incursion into Nigeria's political space, which they had said was unnecessary.
Indeed, they described it as a mistake. And they also attributed the January 15th episode as being partly responsible for the continuing deep-seated national tension which the country continues to face in terms of regionalism, cutthroat competition for access to power and material resources, and invariably political instability and ethnicity, as well as aggression.
Now, the guests also described January 15 coup as a big mistake, especially considering the reasons that used for the action, which were mainly corruption and violence, and that such action was not justified at all. But constantly till today, we're still having corruption, we still have violence here and there, and insecurity, and what have you. Of course, I am not in support of the coup, so to speak, but the point is that some of the points that are adduced for that unnecessary coup is still with us.
There's no question about that, Kirian. If you recall, and of course historians are quite familiar with this, the coup plotters claimed that political leaders were 10% collectors of bribes in terms of the contracts they were awarding, and therefore refer to them as 10%ers. And the country had also witnessed a great deal of bloodletting on account of the violence that accompanied the federal and regional elections. But the guests advocated a professional recognition of the gallant men and women of the armed forces, aside from the political honor that they have received. That's to say, men and women who sacrificed their lives for the country, because arising from the events of January 15, 1966, we had a counter coup on the 29th of July, also in the same year, and ultimately the civil war that lasted 30 months beginning in May of 1967 and ending formally on the 15th of January 1970.
And they called on the citizens to purge themselves of suspicion, ethnicity, religious sentiments, and ensure fairness, equity, and inclusiveness, as well as a proper utilization of funds and general spread of development projects.
But what is equally important is to ensure that Nigerians today get to be more united, and this of course will require entrenching nationalism and also initiating a process of genuine national reconciliation. And this is because, Kirian, the point was also made that at the end of the Civil War, when we had the 3 R's, namely rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reconciliation, the leg of it, that's to say reconciliation, has never fully been achieved, notwithstanding a number of initiatives, including the introduction of the NYSC scheme and the construction and establishment of many more unity schools, as well as, of course, the inclusion of the federal character principle in the Constitution.
Well, this is one reason why we are referred to as a developing nation. Most of those things you mentioned are not really playing out, today. So we hope that something good will happen going forward. Now, how and who would initiate the process of genuine reconciliation? What steps should be taken to achieve that? What strategies or modalities should be adopted to ensure that Nigerians are more united? What kind of devolution of power should be done to guarantee more united and inclusive Nigeria? These are some of the questions we intend to ask as we continue our discussion on January 15 in Nigeria's history. Today on Good Morning Nigeria, we are reaching you live on the network service of the NTA. My name is Kirian Umayo. Thank you for joining us.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kirian to also welcome you to the program, in the course of which we have our complimentary segments, including newspaper review and business. For now, here is Dennis Adegunloye, who has the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning, Kingsley, and Kieran, good morning, Nigeria. Here is the morning news. Governor Bello Muhammad Matawale of Zamfara State has expressed optimism that the bandits and other criminal elements threatening the peace, security and socio-economic well-being of the state will soon meet their Waterloo. The governor stated this while briefing journalists after a closed-door engagement with President Muhammadu Buhari on the security situation in the state.
I wonder how people will just be writing figures without, having genuine information from those communities. We confirmed 58 people were killed, but I assured the people of Zamfara State that they will see changes very soon, because I know what we discuss and I know what is going to happen.
Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has inaugurated an expanded partnership committee on sustainable blue economy. The committee, which is chaired by the Vice President, is composed of state governors, several ministers, representatives of military and security agencies, and other members from the private sector. The committee's terms of reference include providing an assessment of the current realities, opportunities, and challenges for economic diversification and the growth of a sustainable blue economy in Nigeria, as well as identifying and reviewing relevant policies and institutional capacity building mechanisms for blue economy development in Nigeria, among others. The blue economy is the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs while preserving the health of ocean ecosystems. It entails emerging renewable energy, seabed extractive activities, and marine biotechnology and bioprospecting. The Central Bank of Nigeria and Farmers Association of Nigeria are set to release about 3 million bags of rice paddy to processors across the country. The initiative is expected to address the challenges being faced by millers and also to crash the price of processed rice in the market.
Farmer that used to, depend on modules of fertilizer now had access to between 4 and 6 bags of fertilizer for his hectare. We also introduced enhanced the dry season agriculture.
This, of course, has had a very positive effect in mobilizing the farmers in the South region, the 6 states of the South.
The National Assembly is set to reconvene plenary today with consideration of the Constitution Amendment Bill top on its priority list.
When we return, we have one major legislation, and that is the Constitution Amendment. We are expectant that our committee on the review of the Constitution will be presenting the report to this chamber as soon as we resume.
We are ready to go. This Senate means business.
First Lady of Nigeria, Aisha Muhammadu Buhari, has called on women of the All Progressives Congress to adopt new strategies of ensuring more women participation in politics and other decision-making processes. The First Lady made the plea when she received the Vice President of Liberia, Joel Howard Taylor, who was in the State House ahead of the two-day APC National Progressives Women Conference slated for 18th and 19th of January 2022.
We have to adopt the better strategies to maximize elective positions and other opportunities for the Nigerian women. At the core of it, we need unity of purpose and support for each other as women.
These conferences allow us a platform to talk, to engage, to see how women are doing exceptional things across our region.
State governors on the platform of the All Progressives Congress say the proposed February 2022 National Convention of the party is sacrosanct. The governors at a strategic meeting in Abuja have mandated the Governor Mai Mala Buni-led caretaker committee to fix a date for the National Convention.
We discussed our oncoming convention, which you may recall I had cause to address the press after we visited with Mr. President in November, where we expressed that both Mr. President and the party have agreed that the convention will take place in February. He spoke about our unanimous appreciation of Mr. President and especially the confidence he has in the forum.
Meanwhile, the PDP Governors Forum meeting has ended in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, with some resolutions targeted at ensuring a positive transformation of the party and the nation at large. Chairman of the PDP Governors Forum and Governor of Sokoto State, Aminu Waziri Tambuwal, briefed journalists at the end of the meeting.
An early concluded electoral act is vital for credible elections. The strategies to confront terrorists, kidnappers, bandits, and other criminals still is a major problem. The meeting urged eligible Nigerians of all walks of life, particularly the youth, to register en masse with INEC to exercise their franchise in the 2023 general elections.
The Nigeria Center for Disease Control has confirmed 249 new cases of COVID-19 in Nigeria. A breakdown of the cases shows that Lagos recorded the highest number for the day with 59 new cases, followed by Adamawa recording 46, Imo records 37, Kwara 14, Rivers 13, Kaduna 10, and Taraba 9. Other states with new cases are Cross River with 8, Bauchi 7, Niger 5, Delta and Ogun 4 new cases each, Nasarawa 2, and a single case in Kano. The recent figures bring the total number of confirmed cases in the country to 251,178, out of which 224,629 have been treated and discharged. The death toll now stands at 3,110. Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues after this break with Kieran and Kingsley. Good morning.
Well, the housing solution we have developed is a multifaceted one. First, we have tried to lead a program to build what we think will be an acceptable and hopefully affordable housing type based on surveys we did in 2015-2016 and construction that started in 2017. And that's going on in 34 states as the National Housing Program.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Everybody knows the secret to good cooking is that special ingredient. The mothers know it. But does this new generation know it? Let's find out. Mothers, daughters, are you ready? Yeah! Let the cooking begin.
Erisco tomato paste.
Now we get home, now we get love,
now we get children.
We despise the world with a meal so great and so healthy.
You know we've got your back. Oh,
with Erisco, Regico, Nagico. Ladies and gentlemen, food is ready.
Food of love. Tomato paste.
Hi, na pochette yali nada.
Nagico tomato paste.
Good food for the body. Yum yum for the body.
Erisco Regico and Nagico tomato paste is made by Erisco Foods Limited, feeding Africans with healthy foods.
See, nurse, she's saying she feels unwell despite my efforts to practice good hygiene.
Mom says washing hands to keep the germs away.
Washing hands is good, but surfaces can also have germs, and you shouldn't use just anything for cleaning them. Use Jik. Jik's formula has been scientifically proven to stay active for longer, giving you whitening and germ kill protection on a variety of surfaces. Disinfect to protect, just Jik it. Endorsed by National Association of Nigerian Nurses and Midwives.
The 157-kilometer Lagos-Ibadan Railway is the first double-track standard gauge railway to be built in West Africa. The Mobolaji Johnson train station is a masterpiece, an infrastructure that is gradually becoming an iconic building in Lagos State. The modern facilities put the station on a world map of train stations. Likewise, other new train stations across the country built to world-class standards. The train and its convenience is indeed an admirable effort, with commendations from Nigerians.
This is a station that we have to commend the federal government for putting a beautiful face, empowering us in Lagos State, not only in economic and political arena.
I can say that I'm really impressed with the infrastructures in place. Kudos to the Minister of Transportation, kudos to the federal government.
Truly, good things are coming out of Nigeria, and the federal government is deserving of all the applause.
Ovaltine 3-in-1. It has great taste.
Big day ahead.
Yummy, yummy, full of nourishment and vitality. Active bodies and sharp minds. So yeah, Ovaltine 3-in-1. Ovaltine 3-in-1.
New Ovaltine 3-in-1. Smart choice for smart kids.
Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
Now time for business. The Customs Service in the last 6 years has not only been meeting its revenue generation target, but exceeding it. Now let's join Alika Banache Aroa for details.
Year 2020, which was COVID-stricken, the service was still active in its responsibilities. The amount generated in 2021 is to the tune of 2.24 trillion naira, which is more than 1.6 trillion naira target set for the year. It is also more than 1.562 trillion naira generated in 2020, which represents a 43.45% increase. The service has therefore attributed the breaking sources to some factors.
It's the combination of actions that have been taken, reform activities that have taken place over the years, that is resulting in this increasing revenue generation to the coffers of the Federation every year.
Customs also disclosed that efforts to prevent entry of items that could compromise the security of the citizens, economy, and the well-being of the people resulted in the seizure of assorted items with a duty paid value of 13.79 billion naira, while 160 suspects are at different levels of investigation or prosecution. The NCS also listed other landmark achievements that boosted national security and economy.
The modernization unit introduced the mobile web tracker. The mobile web tracker, by the way, is a mobile application that enables individuals that have linked with our server to, ascertain the status of declaration or payment. What that means is that at any point, the status of your vehicle or cargo can be ascertained by our anti-smuggling operatives.
The customs spokesperson is optimistic that the takeoff of e-customs, which process is now at the final stage of signing agreements, will also enhance its operation in the year 2022. With business news, Alika Opanachi, Arua.
Many thanks, Alika, for the business package on Good Morning Nigeria. Coming up next is Newspaper Review.
Now we have a reviewer, Bayo Tebi, with us. Bayo, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Right, Bayo, good to see you. Let's take a look quickly at the two newspapers that we have. There is a leadership newspaper, and on the front page of the leadership newspaper, we take a look at the following headlines. 2023, that's the kicker. Southeast leaders woo North and vote 10 billion naira for Igbo candidate. Now you have that story in greater detail on page 4. Now, PDP governors silent on zoning and consensus candidate. APC governors pass vote of confidence on Buni committee. As PGF DG, PGF stands for Progressive Governors Forum, Director General resigns. It's time to reward Tinubu, Shetima, Babachia tell President Muhammadu Buhari and stakeholders. Progressive women move to break political and gender barriers. A whole national conference on women participation, inclusiveness and rights today to present one voice ahead of poll. Editors hold town hall on self-scrutiny in Kano. Editors hold town hall on self-scrutiny in Kano. Police rescue 16 kidnapped victims in Kaduna. And Kano, that's Nnamdi Kanu, to face fresh terrorism charges. These are some of the headlines we're taking from the front page of the leadership newspaper. Kyria.
Now let's turn to Al Jazeera newspaper. PDP governors to National Assembly override Buhari on electoral bill amendment. With riders process vital for credible elections, Ekiti Congress Committee submits report. Prioritize electoral bill upon resumption, CSOs urge National Assembly. That's on page 7. Northern leaders demand release of Leah Sharibu and others. Below that, we have bandits raid communities, demand petrol. That's communities in Niger State. That story is also on page 7 of Al Jazeera. At the bottom of the Al Jazeera newspaper, Akwa Ibom. Protesters accuse monarch of using cultists to impose levy. It's on page 6. Cholera. NCDC records 3,604 deaths. 111,062 cases in 2021. It's on page 10. On page 27, we have federal government to borrow 471 billion naira from capital market in the first quarter of this year, or it's on page 27. Sports now, the 2021 AFCON, no reason to underrate Guinea-Bissau, says the interim coach of the Super Eagles, Austin Eguavo. Let's bring in Bayo now.
Thank you, Kirian. Let's start with the story relating to the Governors Forum of the People's Democratic Party, which rose from the meeting in Port Harcourt with a 9-point communique. They call for an early conclusion of the Electoral Act amendment to enhance credible elections. Presented by Governor Aminu Waziri Tambuwal of Sokoto State, they urged the National Assembly to either conclude deliberations quickly by either overriding Mr. President's withheld assent or delete areas of complaints. The party congratulated his family for the National Convention and also the emergence of the National Executive Council. They observed that the President's countenance and discountening state police deserve to be reconsidered because state police is a viable solution to tackling insecurity in Nigeria, which they describe as a near collapse with ceaseless flow of Nigerian blood. The meeting was attended by 10 of the governors. They said Nigerians of all walks of life who are eligible should get themselves ready. The youth, they should register en masse with the aim of exercising their franchise in 2023. The Daily Trust reports that the All Progressive Congress may decide a convention date today. The paper says that May Bala Muni-led Caretaker Extraordinary Convention Planning Committee is to meet today. They said the deliberation of formation of committees for the convention and the possible name of a date will be decided today. Governor May Malabuni is reported to have visited President yesterday after he participated in the APC governors meeting, which ended on Sunday. A fallout of the meeting of the governors of the APC is the Director General of the Progressive Governors Forum, Salihu Lukman, who is said to have resigned. The Daily Trust reports that the DG resigned over divisions among governors over his statements on issues which tended to antagonize his position with those of party top hierarchy. Nigeria will be playing its last match in the first round on Wednesday. Nigeria is to play Guinea-Bissau, while Egypt, the other two will play Sudan. Those are the two teams in the group division. Nigeria, the spirit in the Nigerian camp is quite high, and the coach says that there's no rationale in changing strategy, and Nigeria is going all out to at least fight for all the maximum points at stake. The Commandant General of the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps, Ahmed Audi, has disbanded the anti-vandal unit in the Rivers State. This is sequel to allegations by Governor Nyesom Wike of Rivers State that the anti-vandal unit and the police are allegedly aiding and abetting vandals and illegal bunkerers in Rivers State. It may be recalled that illegal bunkering is responsible for the soothing atmosphere that has pervaded Port Harcourt and its larger part of the Rivers State. The Controller General Audi says that the Corps will investigate and those fingered will be dealt with decisively to serve as a deterrent to others.
Well, Bayo, just to clarify that, it's not illegal bunkering specifically that is responsible for the atmospheric pollution in rivers, more particularly in Port Harcourt, the state capital. It is illegal refining. Illegal refining of stolen crude that is responsible for the suit. And there are allegations that Governor Nyesom Wike made at a meeting held with the security agencies in the state. Those allegations are very weighty. And I believe that it is not sufficient merely to disband the unit, because the Civil Defense Corps has had its task cut out for it in terms of the protection of critical national assets. So if therefore there is an allegation that some of his officers, say in Rivers State, have been aiding and abetting illegal crude oil refining, the question arises, who were those officers? And have they been tapped? Have they been taken in for questioning? And what are the further steps that will follow? This is just, if you like, this is the onshore version of the stealing and selling of Nigeria's crude on the high seas. That, these are matters that, of course, have often led to losses in terms of our national revenue. And Rivers people have had to endure the pollution arising from illegal refinery for a number of years now. And you ask yourself the question, what happened to the modular refineries?
Actually, the Controller General had directed that the officers that were involved should report to the headquarters for the purposes of investigation to deal with it once and for all decisively.
Gentlemen, there's a lot more to the issue of bunkering and what have you. High-placed individuals are involved. Any illegal business that sustains for as long as illegal bunkering, there are official hands in it. There are no two ways about these things. You know, I mean, disbanding and all of that will not help us. Let them peep into what is going on
and get to the roots.
Get to the roots. The people are, and look, if you're not a professional, you can't even do bunkering in the first place because you need some technology to be able to do that. Right. So, because from bunkering to refining and what have you. But before we leave, before we let you go, you know, the Australian Grand Slam, or yes, better, you know, is going to happen without the champion, Novak Djokovic, right? And, you know, some people have said that, look, the young man ought to have participated, but because of the issues concerning his vaccination status and what have you, I personally would believe that, look, such a person who's an international figure should be vaccinated. Because the whole thing lies on vaccination. Yes. You should be vaccinated.
Rules are rules, and rules are no respecter of persons.
Exactly.
So if you are entering into a country, and there are rules governing that, irrespective of whether you are the world #1 or the champion, you ought to obey that rules. He tried to assert it by going to court, and eventually the court ruled, and he was deported.
Well, I think the facts are perhaps more elaborate than we have tried to abbreviate them in the last few seconds. Novak Djokovic did not simply head to Australia. Novak Djokovic received an exemption in the first instance from the from Tennis Australia. Now, it is the right and power and prerogative of border control to admit you into a country irrespective of whether or not you have a valid visa. And the country has exercised its authority. But we also should ask ourselves the question, is the rest of the world fully vaccinated? Is there any country that has attained 100% vaccination? There are anti-vaxxers all over the world. And it so happens that Novak Djokovic holds very strong views that he doesn't feel that, you know, he should take the vaccine, just like some persons. And of course, if you hold such views, invariably there are consequences. And this is part of what the Australian authorities have exercised. But we must not miss out the political dimension to all of this. Australia is facing an election very soon. And so the country must be seen to be, the country's leaders and political authority must be seen to be tough. Australia has achieved about 75% or so total vaccination. So the 25% that is not vaccinated, what happens to them? So Novak Djokovic has missed the opportunity of probably, you know, increasing his haul of Grand Slams. He has 20 equal to Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. But there's no question about it that it's a big loss to the Australian Open tournament. We started yesterday. And he is the greatest human being ever to have picked up a tennis racket.
That is true, you know, but he has to lead by example as a leader in that tournament or in the tennis world, you know, because COVID-19 is no respecter of anybody. He has caught it once, right? And for a nation who's organizing an international encounter of that magnitude, persons that will participate in the competition at least should be vaccinated.
Locally here, yesterday, the FCTA enforced no vaccination, no entry, including staff.
Yeah, but I agree.
The staff cannot go there and say that my terms of employment did not say that I have to be vaccinated before I come to the office. The rules along the line has changed.
That's right. There's no question. I agree. I mean, all three of us sitting here, we are vaccinated. No question about that. Double and even a booster. So, but the US Open, which is the last Grand Slam of the year, took place last year, and there was no requirement for vaccination. But these are different countries and different rules. But the point is that the Australian Open is the poorer for it this year. Without Novak Djokovic. We appreciate you for being around.
Thank you very much.
It's Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. We take a short break now. When we return, we're getting ahead with our principal item for discussion this morning, part 2 of January 15th in Nigeria's history.
The Nigerian aviation sector is rapidly growing with the construction of new international airport terminals in several regions of the country. The new Murtala Mohammed International Airport has an estimated passenger increase of 30 million annually and 15 million for Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, Abuja. Malam Aminu Kano International Airport is also expected to open new frontiers for the region with more travel capacity for the annual Hajj, while the new Akanu Ibiam International Airport, Enugu, avails more business opportunities connecting the industrial cities in the region to the world. These new terminals beat world-class standards with enabling infrastructure that aid air travel, tourism, and the eventual growth of the country's GDP.
Open up commerce and, of course, link us to international societies.
People from international community will come here to do business, and then that will bring in more revenue to the state.
Now, distances can be seamlessly covered as Nigeria keeps raising its bar to suit global infrastructure standards.
See, nurse, she's saying she feels unwell despite my efforts to practice good hygiene.
Mom says wash your hands to keep the germs away.
Washing hands is good, but surfaces can also have germs, and you shouldn't use just anything for cleaning them. Use Jik. Jik's formula has been scientifically proven to stay active for longer, giving you whitening and germ kill protection on a variety of surfaces. Disinfect to protect, just Jik it. Endorsed by National Association of Nigerian Nurses and Midwives.
The NOA, for example, has succeeded a great deal in sensitization during the pandemic, and we have found the community mobilization officers most effective in the sensitization and in the advocacy campaigns, creating awareness on the coronavirus pandemic. We have done this through the production of jingles, which were very widely distributed in different languages: in English, in Hausa, in Yoruba, in Igbo, in Tiv, in Igala, in Kanuri, in Fulfulde, in Ijo, in Isoko, in Bini. In talk of any other language you can think of, we had translated sensitization messages.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
The counsel of our fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Prompt for continuation of our conversation on January 15 in Nigeria's history. Let's take these excerpts put together by Ekene Ndulwe.
This country had always been divided, and the nature of the killings that happened in the 1966 coup, both the one in January and the reprisal one, even further emphasized the division in the country. So, in the light of all that, yes, we can say it was a mistake. The reasons adduced, corruption, later violence after the elections, everything would, with the benefit of hindsight now, amounts to a mistake.
It marked a very dark beginning, I will say also, as far as the political history, as well as the sociology of the entire Nigerian nation is concerned. This is perhaps as a result of the manner in which the rest of the nation were viewed, on the sectional nature in which the principal actors in that particular military purge, reflected.
What should concern us is that what is being done. How are we trying to come out of that loop? What lessons have we learned in order to be a more united, a stronger country? Well, you will agree with me that as part of the coup, subsequent government, we are scared of coup, and therefore they did not give much to development of our kinetic ability. And that we have paid dearly when the issue of Boko Haram came.
It is practically impossible for you to govern this country without social justice, equity, and natural fairness. But that is theoretically. If you don't have a leader that knows that leadership is a trust, that believes that he is responsible to account for every minute, every second of his leadership to somebody who is the supreme deity. If you don't have somebody that believes in that, somebody that believes he is just an emperor, whatever he does is all right, then you will have problems.
All right, now those were excerpts from the first part of our conversation on January 15th in Nigeria's history. That conversation, part one of it, took place on Friday. That was last week. Today, we have also assembled another set of very distinguished guests to interrogate matters arising from January 15th. With us in the Abuja studios, let's welcome Major General Ibrahim Bata Haruna, popularly known as General IBM Haruna. General Haruna, of course, is a former Federal Commissioner for Information and Culture. That's what they were titled at the time. That's the equivalent of a Minister of Information. He also is a lawyer. General IBM Haruna, we appreciate your being with us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you too. We, of course, have to commend General IBM Haruna, senior citizen, 81 going 82, for him to have been up this early to be part of today's conversation. Let's also welcome Chief Femi Fani-Kayode. Chief Femi Fani-Kayode is a lawyer and also former Minister of Aviation. And he has a personal perspective to the events of 1966. His father, of course, was one of the political leaders in the Western region at the time. Chief Kayode, delighted to have you this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, and also joining us in this conversation this morning is Osita Okechukwu, Director General of the Voice of Nigeria. So you're welcome to the program.
Good morning, Nigeria.
And from our Ibadan studio, we are being joined by Professor Olutayo Adesina, a Professor of History, University of Ibadan. So thank you, Prof, for waking up with us this morning.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning and Happy New Year.
All right, gentlemen, once again, a delight to have you with us. Let's begin this conversation with General IBM Haruna. General Haruna, we know what happened, unfortunately, on the 15th of January 1966. That was the day Nigeria lost her innocence and the First Republic collapsed on account of a military coup. Was the military as a class ready for the event of January 15th and ultimately its aftermath?
Well, the military was not prepared for coup events. The military was trained to be subservient to the civil authorities or to the government. And what happened in January 1966 was an explosion of events that determined the pulse of Nigeria's politics up to that point. And I would like to reflect on some of these events very briefly. As for me, on that day, I was at the posting party that was being held by Brigadier General Mai Malari. I was there as also hosting the CEO of 4th Battalion, Colonel Lajima, who was commanding officer of 4th Battalion. I had served with the 4th Battalion in the Congo. Now, briefly, the pulse, as at January 1966, very briefly, when we look back, we know Nigeria had gone through some heating of the polity in 1953 by the motion for self-government, followed by a change, peaceful change to Republican Constitution in 1963. But we know also before 1966, we had the Benue, the Tiv area uprising, which took the attention of the military into combat with indigenous territory. Then we know also we had the treason trial, which had put Awolowo and Enahoro in prison. We know that there was a debacle, political debacle between Awolowo and Akintola. Briefly, those things I recall shaped the minds of even the military. And before that, we have divisions whereby there was the Omo Odudua, there's the Igbo State Union, there was Jamiar Mutane Arewa. All these did not tend to cohere the Nigerian nation by 1966. So the military got young officers who had become ambitious because they were not the leaders of the military before independence or immediately after independence. But the pulse of the nation, the political pulse of the nation, was also influencing them. And the initiative which they took was a political initiative. It was a conspiracy of different army leaders, Nzogu, Ifeajuna, and maybe others whose interests were not clearly stated in the formative conspiracy and the execution of the coup. As a result, of course, it was not carried in perhaps according to plan. And we know as a result, we had disproportionate fracture to the polity as a result of the casualties of the politicians, of the military, and also on the geopolitical spread. So I said the political pulse of the Nigerian state was brought about by this coup 1966 fracturing. As a result, of course, let me perhaps stop here because we knew what followed.
Yes,
the civil war and the defiance of discipline within the military, and so on and so forth.
Well, sir, thank you indeed for this historical background that you have laid. Of course, that will also lead us into picking some of the lack of cohesion that you mentioned in the political space as well as in the military. Let's bring in Fani Kayode here now. The grievances of those leaders, what the coup plotters, so to speak, was alleged corruption. And I've listened to him, some of the things that he said concerning the wave of violence and the lack of cohesion among the political class and different parts of the country. I am not saying that the coup is justifiable, but to you, was there any reason, for such a move by those young officers?
Well, first of all, let me thank NTA for hosting this very important program. Secondly, let me also commend General IBM Haruna, who has analyzed the situation as it was then very, very well. And it's an honor to be here with you, sir. You're a great man. And I know the role you played throughout history And I'm very, very happy that you're here, sir. You're still with us. Going to your question, first of all, I don't think anything can justify the events of January 15th, 1966. Absolutely nothing. I witnessed part of that. I know what happened virtually everywhere in that country because I've made a point of looking at it historically. I'm a historian, you know, and apart from anything else. And the reasons that were adduced for the course of action that were taken, in my view, do not make sense. You talk about corruption, you talk about ruptures here and there. Of course, there were issues in the First Republic, but the First Republic, in my view, probably remains the most sane and the most progressive in terms of leadership, quality of leadership that we've had in this country. These were men who, generally speaking, were very decent, civilized men, educated men, who really loved Nigeria from across the board. They had their differences, but to try to justify the actions of January 15th, 1966, by saying that, well, we did this because why we struck and all that kind of thing, has never really made sense to me. Of course, we've all been on a journey of discovery on this issue. For me, the bottom line is this. The facts of what happened that night, which a lot of people shy away from, when you look at those facts, you will agree with me that nothing could have justified it. A situation whereby the Prime Minister was murdered, taken from his home and murdered, Sir Tafawa Balewa, where the Premier of the Northern Region, Sir Ahmadu Bello, was murdered together with his wife. A situation where Chief Esel Akitola, the Premier of the West, was murdered in cold blood. A situation where great army officers like Brigadier Mai Malari, Colonel Shodeinde, there was Pam also, Lieutenant Colonel Pam, and so many others were killed. Ademola Egun that you mentioned were all butchered. Were all killed for no reason whatsoever. Ademola Egun was killed together with his 8-month pregnant wife in Kaduna, I believe, you know, on that night. And these men went into the homes of these people and slaughtered them in cold blood. They came to our home as well. My father was Deputy Premier of the Western Region at the time. And I remember I was 6 years old when they came, led by Captain Wobosi, who I got to know very well, by the way. He died last year. We got to know each other very well towards the end of his life. But extraordinary events that night. I remember them coming up the drive. I remember them storming our house. I remember my father going out to meet them. And I remember distinctly them flooding into the house, ransacking the whole house, threatening everybody's life. And I remember distinctly an army officer coming up to me, because everybody was wailing and crying, including my mother, putting his hand on my head and saying to me that, don't worry, we will not kill your father. He said it to me 3 times. And I stopped crying after that. They took my father away. And as Providence would have it, he was the only person that was not killed that night by these army officers. And later on, Captain Wobosi confirmed the fact that he was the one. He said he remembered distinctly, and that he was the one that came and put his hand on my head. So there were some humane moments, but it was a barbaric night. It was a night of slaughter. It was a night of shame. They went to Esel Akitola's house. He resisted them. The minute he stepped out, they shot him and they killed him in cold blood. They went down to Lagos, and what saved the country, which I don't think has been celebrated or emphasized enough, because we have real heroes in this country. I mean, what saved the country was the fact that when they got to Dudam Barracks, they couldn't kill, or they didn't manage to kill Lieutenant Colonel Gawan as he then was. He had just come back from being abroad, and he was assigned to Dudam Barracks. They didn't find him that night. He was elsewhere. They didn't kill him. But the man of the moment, in my view, and the general will be able to confirm if I'm right or wrong, was a man by the name of, at that time, Lieutenant Paul Tafai. He's now a general, retired general, who was at Dudam Barracks and who single-handedly started to go from place to place with his loyal soldiers, resisting those that implemented this coup d'etat and this mutiny, resisting them, fighting them, arresting them, and keeping them in custody. And he paved the way for the return of General Gawan to come back to Dudam Barracks. And Gawan came in, and that is how Gawan's life was saved, and the troops were rallied to resist this mutiny. My father was taken to Dudam Barracks, and when he got to Dudam Barracks, it was a man called Takoda, Lieutenant Tafa, under the orders of Gawan, that stormed where he had been kept, and the people that were holding him were killed, and he was freed. So I know the story inside out, and it's very unfortunate that most of our people have not studied the history. But what happened that night was horrendous, and I pray it will never happen again. Of course, there were other events after that that were a counter to that as a result of the fact that when Ironsi came to power, because Ironsi literally took power, that's a story for another day, the following day, when he refused to step down at a celebrated meeting with all the remnants of Tafawa Balewa's government, and he was asked to step, and Dip Charima was supposed to take over, and they refused to allow Dip Charima to take over. And in my view as a historian, what I always argue is this, that the first unsuccessful coup, as bloody as it was, in Nigeria took place on January 15th, 1966, led by Ifejuana, incidentally, and many of the politicians were also involved, which is what a lot of people don't like to say. They knew about it, especially those in the NCNC at the time. Many of them knew about it, but of course they ran away when it failed. But it failed. But the first successful coup d'etat, in my view as a historian, that took place in Nigeria was on January 16th, 1966, when Ironsi refused to step down. When Ironsi took power and refused to hand over power to Dip Charima, who was number 2 to Sir Tafawa Balewa, and simply said he wouldn't do it. And the president at the time, the Senate, Senate president at the time, oh goodness me, I've forgotten his name.
Orizu.
That's right, Orizu, who was there because, yes, he was there. He refused to swear in Dip Charima, and that's how Ironsi now said, well, listen, I can't guarantee your protection unless you hand me power. He said, look out of the window. My father was at the meeting. So, Shagari was there, my father was there, Chief Akijiri was there. They've all written about this. Look out of the window. We're surrounded by soldiers. I can only guarantee your protection and your safety of your lives if you allow me to take power. And that's how Ironsi took power. And throughout his time in power, he refused to prosecute those that perpetuated these evil, heinous acts. And by the way, that coup was led by Ifejuana. This is very, very important. It wasn't by Nzogu. Ifejuana, I'm so sorry, yes. He led the coup. Now, they refused, when Ironsi came in, he refused to prosecute these people. Instead, he simply incarcerated them. In the eyes of those who supported, they were heroes. They were not prosecuted. And that is what provoked the reaction for the counter coup in July 29, 1966, where particularly the northern officers said, listen, our leaders have been killed, military and political leaders, and we're not going to accept this. And there was a counter coup, which was a very, very bloody affair, and which directly or indirectly led to the Nigerian Civil War. So that's the history of it. But specifically, that night was a terrible night. Anybody that feels that, because, there's this heroic aspect that is attributed to people like Nzogu and so on and so forth. We've all done it in the past. Sometimes, when I was young, I did things that young men do. When I'm a bit older, I realized that I was completely wrong. I do not see any of them as being heroes. I do not. I think what happened was wrong. If there were grievances, if there were issues at that time, they could have been reconciled in a much more different way, in a civilized way, where bloodshed, innocent blood did not have to be shed. To drag men out of their homes in the middle of the night, kill them, kill their wives, and so on and so forth, is not a heroic act, it's an act of a coward.
Femi Fani-Kayode, thank you very much there for the recall. Of course, we also have to note that one of the prominent politicians killed on that night was Chief Festus Okotie-Eboh, who was Minister of Finance. Fani, thank you very much for the recall. Of course, your dad lived on up until 1990, 91. Yes. So let's bring in now Osita Okechukwu, Director General of the Voice of Nigeria. Mr. Okechukwu, again, let's have your perspective on the events of January the 15th. I was just wondering, I mean, if we were to look back into the books, what examples were those military officers aping in getting into a coup d'etat as bloody as it was on that night?
Let me start by saying that it was an era of coup d'etat, especially in Latin America and other parts of African countries. So it was like the main issue then. But I would have wanted to say that we politicians need to learn lessons of what happened then. That the day we continue to think that my own tribe is the best, that if you want to share something, you are Igbo, go and give the Igbos. If you want to do because you're Yoruba, go and give Yorubas. That those fault lines, have we learned lessons from those fault lines? Because back to the 50s, there was no unity among the ethnic groups. There was division, there was suspicion, there were stereotypes. And even those who made valid points to the days to the independence that, look, why don't the British tally a while? We are not yet ready. We need to do this, we need to do that before we came to independence. They neglected them. And those who came to power as well, they just went to the GRAs, the shoes left by the white people. They did not in any way think what are the fundamentals where this democracy will permeate to the people. And we are making the same mistake today. We are still neglecting the social contracts between the led and the followers. That those who came to power must at every point remember, one, luckily we all claim we are religious, we love God, we believe in God, but most of the time we do not make our selection based on the best we have in the country. We go for patronages of these are my people, these are not my people. So whenever you have such continue to linger, the animosity will build up. It was very clear that even the Western crisis was not that sharp if it was looked into on the basis of a lot of people from this, the western part of the country up to today, they do not credit Akintola with any achievement. But they forgot that he built the University of Ife and most of the monuments and followed up all that Awolowo laid down as a government. But because of animosity, why is he having a handshake to the north? Why is he doing it to the south? Why is he doing that? So what I will, like NTA did well to look back where we're coming from. But I would like the next step NTA will take is also to try to line up those fault lines that led to that coup. Are we repeating it? If we are repeating it, NTA should also call people to advise on what to do next. Because it's good, we cannot forget yesterday, because yesterday is today's architecture. But did we learn any lesson? My fear is that we have not learned lesson from what happened on January 1996. 1966, sorry.
All right. Thank you indeed, the DG Voice of Nigeria. Professor Olutayo Adeshino, you've listened to other guests, of course, who all came from a historical point of view. Late Sam Bekwe, the former governor of Imo State, did say something when he was in power. He did say that the colonial masters left us too early. You know, that we didn't learn anything about governance before we had independence. This could be true because from what our guests have said so far, it does appear that we were not prepared because of, you could talk about animosity, disagreements here and there, quarrels here and there, and young officers say, look, this is time to stop this, you know, even though they went killing and all of that. But what is significant in all of this is that the issues adduced by these plotters are still with us. Let's get our own perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, and I say I am also very happy to be on the same panel with other distinguished Nigerians, most especially General IBM Haruna. I was a very young boy when he was in power, and so it's nice to see him. And Chief Fani Kayode, also nice to see you. Well, looking at Nigeria's history in the 1960s critically, first, it is not fair to say Nigerians were not ready for governance. If you look at the blueprints adopted by the different regions, especially in the 1950s, self-government, internal self-rule, you will see that Nigerians were actually prepared. The disagreements that came later had diverse motives. And as a result of this, what happened subsequently in January 1966, I would say Nigeria had it coming, most especially looking at the crisis in the Western region, especially Operation Wetie. And the men in the military were also Nigerians. They saw what was happening, they understood what was happening, they were listening to conversations, they were looking at all these agreements. And don't also forget that it was a period in which the coup contagion was already gradually spreading. Yes, Latin America, but here in West Africa also, Sylvanus Olympio in Togo had been killed by the Eyadema group. And don't forget also that Nigerians were also being trained in different countries abroad. One of the reasons why Nigerian soldiers were being trained in India rather than Pakistan was because the Pakistani military had gone a little bit rogue also. So Nigeria was careful about this issue of coup contagion, but there was no way you could have insulated those boys who struck on January 15 from what was happening on ground, most especially when these guys were highly politicized, they were educated, and they had used different reasons. It was not only because of corruption, but because of the vociferous tendencies they witnessed, tribalism, the Gotism, and all kinds of things. So yes, Nigeria had it coming, although there is no justification for the dastardly acts that occurred on January 15, but it would have been myopic of anybody to have said, look, they didn't need to do what they did. But as far as they were concerned, they had a reason to do it. And we don't know what could have happened because we don't have the force of clairvoyance. Those who did the coup, perhaps they had a blueprint for ruling, which would also have been negative because we were under a democracy. And to truncate that democracy was to set us back several years. And we are still suffering from that terrible action up till today. But historically, those boys who struck on January 15 felt, I am not making excuses for them, but they felt they had a historic duty to save Nigeria from the cataclysm of events that had been unleashed on the country by the political class. We have not fully written the history of Operation Wetie. It's going to come. But the political class had its own a role to play in what happened on January 15, and I'm sure history will also not excuse them.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Professor Adesina, for the perspective that you have raised. There are a number of ideas arising from the first salvos by each of our guests. I'm just wondering, General IBM, before we get into the larger issues of ensuring national reconciliation, when we take a step back, have we tried, for instance, to interrogate whether there were external forces that might have instigated what the officers did, and they then, of course, covered it up with all forms of rationalization? When Patrice Lumumba was taken out in the Congo, it wasn't just an automatic reaction by the Congolese. There were external influences. And Professor Adesina mentioned the coup also in Togo involving Olympio. We also saw what happened in Ghana to Nkrumah. And then Nigeria, at the heart of the continent with its promise, and of course, once you had a few things bubbling to the top, it would have been so easy for any manipulator, assuming there was any such manipulator from an external environment, to say, this is what we needed to do. Otherwise, I mean, for instance, if the coup had already collapsed And we saw an example of how a coup collapsed in this country in April 1990. When Okar tried to overthrow General Babangida in office. If the coup had already collapsed, why the insistence by the senior military officer at the time, J.T. Agui runs in to say, look, I will be in charge. Were we under some, if I say we now, were the military perpetrators under some illusion or under some manipulation?
Well, the military leaders were perhaps intellectually under some illusion. But that illusion is not directly, in my opinion, imparted by the foreign powers. The colonial master was always viewed as not really interested in giving independence to Nigeria, but to go along and to continue to exploit it in the form of neo-colonialism. However, indirectly, the officers were trained primarily in England, as well as the weapon operators. Material supplies were coming from United Kingdom. So the military doctrine and training were essentially imparted from the British and substantiated subsequently after some time by Canada, United States, and India. But I think, in my mind, I think the basic problem is that we presumed we were a sovereign state. In my thinking, we're a coalition of various ethnic nationalities who are endeavoring and have continued to endeavor to make sense out of the unity of being Nigeria. As a result, the politicians have not, in my mind, learned the basic fundamental politics of state building and state creation. So, having not learned much from that, we have continued with the same complaints that the co-makers made: corruption, injustice, discrimination, disproportionate division of power, and we are repeating similar things that motivated and endangered our growth to democracy, as it were in the early years after independence. Election rule and practice still has not been settled. In those days, direct or indirect candidature, at least I know in the North, they were provided by the feudal system of native authority and native governors. And as the desire for democracy was growing, the makeup of what they call the talakawas, that's the poor, those seeking for liberation from the feudal system, has continued. And as at now, if and when I try to examine what is going on between direct primaries and indirect primaries, I just recall to mind those days when the native authority decided who will be a candidate and who will even vote. So I think that our presumption for becoming a sovereign state was loaded against, the facts or the realities of the existence of the people and the possible enlightenment and education to be Democrats. Then the other, I think that also one can say there's this presumption that we are equals and we have equal rights as citizens, whereas I think we know that the elites and those who command the political and economic and financial power at the crest come from an elite group who have found their ascension from the structure of the Nigerian state and the relationship between the Nigerian state and the social classes that exist in them and wish to perpetuate, you know, their power. So we have perhaps, in my mind, have not applied social engineering that will justify peace, security, and equality and democracy as such. So these challenges are still there. And
okay, thank you, sir. Chief Fani-Kayode, the 1966 coup was not justifiable. Everybody agreed, including the military. Yet, we had other military coup d'etats. As a matter of fact, the military interregnums that we have in this country led us for almost 30 years. Right. So, you know, it became fashionable, you know, for you to have military coups. And that happened up to the early 90s. Now, how did this impact on the nation's development trajectory? You did mention earlier on that politicians were also part of that coup. Right, they contributed to that coup. Yes. And even subsequent coups that we had in this country, politicians were also involved in the coup. So while people are blaming the young officers, you know, who carried out the nefarious act, they're not talking about the politicians who were involved in that. So how did all of this, you know, impact on our development trajectory?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. Coups did continue after that period for a number of years, right up until the 90s. And you know, but the difference when it came to the January 15th, 1966 coup, which made it so heinous, is the fact that innocent civilians were targeted and butchered. I think I'm right in saying this did not happen in probably any other coup that took place ever since that time. People were targeted, civilians, non-combatants, people that were not in the military were killed, plus people that were in the military that were not even prepared. They were killed in cold blood. And it's important to note another distinction between that action of that night and other coup d'etats that came subsequent to that, with possible exception of the July 29th coup. This particular coup was, you know, was executed by people, 95% of the officers, 95%, and I've been through all the names, I know all the names, all came from one particular region in the country. So we can't hide the fact or run away from the fact that there was a very strong ethnic dimension to this. A situation whereby leaders, political and military leaders from the Northwest, what is the Northwest today, the Northeast today, the North Central today, the Southwest today, and the South-South today, were targeted and butchered in cold blood in their homes, and only one officer from the South, what is known as the Southeast today, was killed. That's Unegbe. He was the only one. He refused to give the keys up. He was the quartermaster general, I believe. I think I'm right in saying that. So he didn't give up the keys for the armory, and they killed him. But 95% of the officers that took part in that coup d'etat were from a particular region in the country. And that is another reason why it was distinct to all other coups, except for perhaps the July 29th coup, which was essentially a counter coup. It was a revenge coup, which was essentially a northern affair, where a lot of officers from the Southeast were targeted that night in retaliation. And they did not hide the fact that we did this because our leaders were killed. So the January 15th coup is peculiar. Now, I've heard others adduce reasons, Operation Wet Tear, so on and so forth, violence, corruption, we're not ready for leadership. I don't accept that this was a legitimate reason, and neither do I accept that, you know, we should just fashion out and accept things that people that fail to execute a course of action.
If that coup had been executed without killings, would it have been justified?
It would have been totally unjustified, and I'll explain to you why. Where you have it would have made matters worse. If 95% of the people that executed that coup were from the eastern region, for example, which was a fact, okay, and they now managed to take power, what would the rest of the country have said the following day? And, you know, so you cannot justify it. It was essentially an ethnic grab for power. Now, a lot of people don't like to hear that. I've argued both sides of this over and over again over the years. But we must be true to historical fact and not fashion out our arguments based on political expediency or whatever. Facts are sacred. Opinion is cheap, as you journalists always say. The fact of the matter is that this was a power grab by a particular ethnic group which failed, and they did it for, you may want to justify their reasons for doing it. Oh, there was the Northerners are ruling the Northern. Okay, fine. You may want to justify it that way. You may or you may not. But whatever you say, this was a power grab and it failed. What came after that power grab was equally heinous. A lot of people were killed. It led to pogroms in the north. It led to the civil war. 3 million people were killed. And so many things happened after that, which I've always said was disproportionate in reaction to what happened on January 15th, 1966. It's unacceptable to me, the things that we did to those people over those years. But the beginning of the whole thing, first blood was drawn on that night. It was an ethnic move. It was a grab for power, and it failed. And the people that now took power on January 15th, 1966, January 16th, 1966, refused to move against those guys. Probably because, in my view, because, again, he allegedly came from the same, more or less, ethnic group. And that is how it was perceived, rightly or wrongly. And consequently, others from the north reacted, and then we had a civil war. So it was, it's almost romantic. We mustn't romanticize what happened that night, that, oh, there were good guys and they came in to right the wrongs of the past. No, they had, in my view, a hidden agenda. And if you read a number of books from those, particularly, I have to say this, the foreign correspondents, journalists that were in Nigeria at the time, that wrote about the coup and also wrote about the civil war, you will discover so much about what was going on. We mentioned the political class earlier, involvement, and you're absolutely right. There's no doubt whatsoever. Two things happened. That famous meeting with Ironsi, where the remnants of Tafawa Balewa's government met with him, and he took power. The first thing that happened, you spoke about foreign interference. The British ambassador was there, and he said troops can be brought from Gibraltar within 24 hours to quell the uprising in the north, because Nzogo was still in charge of the north at the time. But that he needed to have Dipcharima or whoever is acting prime minister to sign. And it was Orizu and Ironsi that refused to allow that to happen. You can read a lot into that, because again, they came from the same place. And consequently, Ironsi took part. So the British tried to help, but it was thwarted. Again, I have to mention this. Our president today, General Muhammadu Buhari, President Buhari, was also one of those in Lagos at that time that helped to thwart that January 15th, 1966 coup. There were many other officers there. And, you know, what General IBM Haruna has said, that he was at that famous cocktail party. It must have been remarkable. I wish he could tell us more about that. Because the soldiers that led the coup, Ifejana, were at that same party, and they came back in the middle of the night to kill their commanding officer and their host. In fact, my Malari jumped over the fence at the back of his house, was running from them. He ran into Ifejana saying, something is going on, you know, help me. Ifejana got up and he shot him in the head. This is somebody that was one of his own officers. And we see this element of treachery over and over again. Okafor was another one. I know their names, every single one of them. The one that went into Ademuluge's room and killed him and his eight-month pregnant wife. We know their names. These are not the acts of a soldier. These are not the acts of people that wanted to do something heroic or save the country. They would have taken power. They would have kept the power for themselves. They wouldn't have helped the Igbos. They wouldn't have helped anybody. I believe they would have, it was a power grab for themselves and for themselves alone, and they would have ruled Nigeria, and only God knows where we'd all be today.
You know, Femi Fani-Kayode, thank you very much. Gentlemen, this is part of what we should try to do. Having this historical background, understanding the facts, particularly for the younger generation, and then moving on. And my question is going to Mr. Osita Okechukwu, DG of Voice of Nigeria. You talked about reconciliation, which is an important part. Let's back up a bit. after the chain of events, January 15, 1966, July 29, 1966, which was a bloody counter-coup, and the pogrom that followed in the north, and then the outbreak of the Civil War. At the end of the Civil War in 1970, we had 3 R's. That's what General Gowon's administration came up with: rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reconciliation. The argument is that we have not been able to achieve that third aspect of reconciliation. It appears that, as some persons have argued, that there has been no open national penance to say, look, what happened on January 15th was unacceptable. Let's come to grips with it, perform our penance, as it were, and then move on. We have the NYSC, we have federal character, and all kinds of things. And people argue that unless and until we recognize this, and how we recognize it is an issue that I would like you to also speak to.
Thank you very much. Let me borrow from our elder statesman, IBM Haruna, a general of note. He talks of the issue of trying to understand the plural nature of the society where we live. If you do an examination, as you're saying, in terms of reconciliation, go to any state of the federation today. Most of the governors, if you do an incisive study of any of the states in the country, most of the governors are in one way or the other accused of sectionalism, both in terms of their appointments, in terms of their appointment, in terms of the allocation of resources, and all whatnot. And these were those material conditions that got back to the coup. No matter whatever my big brother will say, the Wetier, Operation Wetier did not arise from nowhere. It was an in-house disagreement in the Western region that cost a lot of lives, that even hampered the election of 1964 and other things. So what we're saying is that reconciliation cannot be done until we are opportune, as IBM Haruna said, as elites, continue to look outside our own preferences, outside our own people. Please, that it is not about your people. It is about those who will lead Nigeria to come to the shining example and giant of Africa. That if we continue to de-emphasize merit, to look for our people, to talk of my people and the rest, we won't go anywhere. The earlier we continue to go to any state, I'm saying this, and no state is being governed by somebody from another tribe. All the states, 36 states of the Federation, are governed by indigenes of each of the states. But the same issue of frictions, though quiet, but breeding. We are facing crisis again because there's hunger in the land, and the majority of the people are being kept away from the goodies of democracy. The earlier we start knowing that the councillor in any ward should take the people that he represents as more important than himself and his primary families, we cannot achieve the reconciliation Kingsley is talking about. The reconciliation starts by using the little resource we have, spreading joy with it, developing the country. Nigeria will get to where we're going the day we try at every unit level, at the councillorship level, at the state governors level, at the presidency, and even at the National Assembly, to look at what are the important items that we put on the table. That happened in every country of the world. America fought a civil war. But after the American Civil War, the North that was dominant in America started investing in the South, and they started investing in the East. America did not reserve or start distinguishing themselves. They managed their diversity. Yes, there's still discrimination in America, but that does not becloud growth. Today, nobody asks who owns Twitter, who owns Google, who owns Apple. Apple has surpassed ExxonMobil. That was the big top dog of all the companies of the world for a long time. But today, Apple is richer than ExxonMobil. But the Americans are not bothered about it. All they did is continue to promote those talents. So let's come back and reconcile ourselves to the fact that God is not partial. God allocates resources, and for us to tap those resources, we will find them. If we do that, we'll minimize events that happened in January or following the other coups. Nobody talks about those coups anymore, because luckily for us, the day President Muhammadu Buhari won the election, everybody was happy that yes, APC actually ended it. So let us continue to end our governance and spread the joy to our people. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Osito Okechukwu. Professor Olutayo Adesina, there's this call for genuine national reconciliation. As a historian, how would this be fashioned out, and to what extent would it heal the wounds and ensure a more united, egalitarian, and just nation?
Well, there are things that are critical to and in nation building. Those are the things that we have neglected over time. I must say we lost two opportunities in achieving the kind of reconciliation that would have served this country in good stead. The first one is that Justice Okuta panel. We lost the opportunity when we turned the entire thing into a circus. We needed to have witnessed people who would come out to tell stories, to beg for forgiveness, to reconcile with people they had wronged over the past, but we didn't do that. The second one, which I think is much more grievous, is when we yanked history out of the curriculum. That is when Nigeria engaged in a crisis of self-immolation. For us to get out of that crisis, it's going to take some time. Now we have had about 2 or 3 generations of Nigerians who have no sense of history. Without a sense of history, you cannot build a nation. Without a sense of history, you cannot reconcile people. We teach our children by rote today, state and capital, Abia, Umuahia, but they don't know those who live in Umuahia. They don't know the people, they don't know the custom, they don't know the culture, they don't know the ideals, values, principles, philosophy, they don't know. You cannot build this country in a vacuum. It's already almost too late to bring history back into the curriculum. It's back now, but it's going to take some time for it to sink, to percolate, and to begin to give our children that knowledge, that sense of identity, that values that will help us to cement the kind of unity we are talking about. So let's work on our history. Yes, we know facts are sacred, opinion is free, but yeah, we still have to start from somewhere. We no longer write history books because nobody wants to read history books. We no longer tell stories because nobody wants to listen. When you talk to these millennials, they tell you, what has that got to do with my wanting to go to the United States, Britain, or Canada? So we have on our hands now a generation that is physically Nigerian, psychologically American, and mentally British. You need such younger elements to create the new building blocks of creating a new Nigeria. The old people, at least some of us who witnessed part of what happened in the 1980s, 1990s, are also aggrieved because, you see, we came, my group came out when structural adjustment was introduced, and so we were unemployed for a long time. We are also aggrieved. Everybody is aggrieved. You know, so let's begin by looking critically at the history books, explaining to a younger generation what went wrong and in what ways they could help to regenerate this country. Well, there is no way we won't go back to the 1950s to the 1960s and talking about external forces, external influences. Yes, they were there, they are there, and they will always be there. Looking at what is happening in the northeast, northwest, talking about our French neighbors, Francophone neighbors, and you think France is not interested in what is going on in Nigeria. I have had occasions to work with declassified documents on Nigeria at the National Archives, Kew Gardens in the UK. And I have been able to read a lot of things written about this period we are talking about by the British intelligence. You will be amazed at what was going on behind the scene. Even an innocuous appointment as the central bank governor of Nigeria became an issue between the Americans and the British. But so many Nigerians don't know what was going on. I have read the documents. So we still need to go back to history. We still need to write history books. We still need to teach our children history. Even we still need to teach the elderly ones history, because history is also about explanation. It's also about analysis. You know, until you confront them with facts and figures, they will hold on to a certain position. So history is critical to that reconciliation we are going to have to start working on. And it's not going to take place tomorrow. It should start yesterday.
Your additional and the other gentlemen, thank you very much for the points that you have raised. Just before we go on this short break, two things. You can see on the screen our Twitter handle is back at NTAGMN, so you can be part of the conversation by sending in your tweets. Of course, we complied with the federal government's directive suspending Twitter several months ago, and now that Twitter is back, we're also back on the screen. And just to also remind our viewers that sometime in 2015, 2016, I'm not sure, we check our archives, Good Morning Nigeria hosted a program on the teaching of history in our schools, and we had a number of distinguished professors who were guests on that program. And after that program, the Honorable Minister of Education, Malam Adamu, issued a directive for the reintroduction of the teaching of history in our schools. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with our conversation.
Finally, the hero of Nigeria's democracy has arrived. He shall usher us into a new phase of development, peace, and prosperity. He is the father of the new Nigeria, His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR. Welcome to another season of giving Nigerians hope yet again. We are sure of a great future for both ourselves and generations yet unborn. We look forward to your leading us as a nation into our manifest destiny. Though the challenges against us as a people are many, we know that your leadership shall set us on the right path to our greatness. A new dawn beckons on us all, and having you as our president is a precursor to this. Thank you for believing in Nigeria. This message is from the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA.
We've been trying our best to contain the situation, and in our operations we've been able to make a lot of recoveries. We've been able to also arrest suspects that are involved in this kind of activities, and we've been able to also recover particularly arms and ammunition from those who are carrying it unlawfully and disturbing the peace of the people. But generally, our morale in the Nigerian police is always guided by our commitment to do what we have sworn to do. Peace and security must be looked into as a priority by all. To look at security as the business of all of us.
This message is from the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Nigerians. Against all odds, we shall and must remain united. We may have our challenges, our problems, and setbacks. However, together we shall overcome them all. What doesn't break us shall make us stronger. This is the mindset that shall bring peace, progress, and prosperity to our beloved country. Do not let tribal and religious sentiments govern how you think, act, or feel. Don't be influenced by those who want to destroy our precious national unity. Everybody who is a Nigerian is your brother and your sister. This is the mindset of the new Nigeria. It is also the mindset that we must all adopt. Let us support each other in creating the Nigeria of our dreams. This message is from the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA.
The Council of Our Fathers.
I believe we have fought one civil war too many in this country. So those who experience it will run away from it.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
You're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're Africa's largest TV network. All our guests are still with us. I want to come back to General IBM Haruna. General IBM Haruna, on the plank of reconciliation. The point has been made that the events of January the 15th were provocative, and the revenge coup validated that provocation, if you like, in terms of what happened on July 29, 1966, and going on. But permit me, if you may, say, look, let's get into the northern mind and ask ourselves this question. What would it take for the North to forgive the events of January 15th, 1966? Or, on the other hand, why has the North not, as it were, overcome the tragedy of January 15th, 1966? Because the subtexts you find all around our country will be traceable to that singular event of January 15th, 1966. What will it cost for us to say, okay, no problem, let's forgive and let's forget and move on?
Well, my thought on this, which I have not really given attention to, but I've always said that we have all become victims and perpetrators of coup. Our concern, as I believe, is to learn lessons historically from the events and to deduce from these events values that will be thought derivable from history, that will support the creation of a new Nigerian society and the acceptance of the general citizens on the fundamental premises on which the Nigerian state will grow. I don't think that talking about Arewa, for example, it was a region. The Eastern was a region, the West were regions. They don't exist in those terms anymore within our political, social, and economic milieu. I represented Arewa during the Oputa panel, and we went through all this agony that we have gone through. And I think we are all victims and we are all perpetrators. What we should concentrate on is how do we build this nation where the Nigerian citizen feels secure, feels he is in a state of equality with his other citizens, and that everyone is patriotic to support that will that will drive Nigeria to become the great black nation that we should be aspiring to. And I think the politicians and the political parties should really stand up, because right now, because of 2023 election, we are reincarnating the things that explodes the country, and it depends on the leadership perception, what is their role in the future makeup of the Nigerian state. Not going back. We have structured ourselves from 3 regions, 4 regions, 12 states, 36 states. But what is the value in this restructuring? What is the common constant value that strings us together? Certainly, we talk about corruption. It's come along with us. Has it been corrected? But if from the history and from our experience, we can actually get the Nigerian citizen in a democratic display, we will perhaps in another 50 years be better than the 50 years we have done since independence.
You can just come from along the same line with respect to reconciliation and how can we forgive ourselves. Of course, we have raised the issue of the killings in 1966, which is condemnable. We also had a counter coup, which was also bloody, and the pogrom that also had, and all of that. Now it's time for reconciliation. How do we go about it?
The reconciliation actually have been a continuous and work in progress. For instance, in the past 60 years, if nothing had happened, infrastructure across the length and breadth of the country is on the daily basis being strengthened by Mr. President. And agriculture, where 70% of Nigerians work, is also being strengthened. By the end of the year, we might have 774 agricultural processing centers and hiring centers, where every able-bodied Nigerian had access to mechanize his agriculture. The day we build a middle class at the villages is the day people will start reconciling themselves fully. Reconciliation in the sense that a lot of percentage of the people throughout history are not interested who is their leader, but they are interested on their prosperity. When that prosperity and peace is lacking, the agitation or divisions or what led like to something like Operation Weti reoccurs, but it might not reoccur because the investment we are doing in Mr. President and the other governors are doing on agriculture and infrastructure is trying to reconcile people at their different units. That even in the future, when we overcome the insecurity, you could see that Nigeria, one, will be in a position to feed itself, and the day we feed ourselves, the prosperity will return. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Osita Okechukwu, Director General of Voice of Nigeria, I would like to appreciate you being part of our conversation this morning. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you some other time.
Okay.
Okay, let's bring in Chief Femi Fani-Kayode once again on the aspect of reconciliation. And the closing thoughts of Osita Okechukwu, he tends to argue that economic development can catalyze reconciliation. If you agree with that view, what else is needed for us to do? To say, look, all right, this wound has only been deep, let's heal and then proceed therefrom.
Well, I agree with him that you do need economic development throughout the country, and I think we need to be fair to all the governments that have been in power since the time of the Civil War. Certainly, that each and every one of them has made great efforts to try to reconcile the Nigerian people and to bring peace to the land. Some more than others, but by and large, everybody has tried their very, very best. But I think that, as the son of a man that moved the motion for Nigeria's independence successfully in 1958, for me, what has happened is quite a tragic thing over the years. And we still have a lot to do, a lot to achieve. It's not just about economic development. There's a lot more that we need to do. First and foremost, the professor that spoke earlier, the historian from, yes, brilliant man, because what he said was absolutely true. You must know the truth before you can be set free. The Bible says, know the truth and you shall be set free. We must go back to studying history. It's not an emotional issue. It's not about whether I like A, B, C, D, or E. Historical facts. This is the only country on the earth that does not know its own history. I, speak to people in the new millennial generation. They know nothing about the past. If you don't know that, you're not going to get anywhere. So the first thing, if you want reconciliation, bear the facts out. And the Puta panel attempted to do that quite successfully. Bear out the facts, accept the facts, take responsibility for your actions, and then you move on. So that's what you need to do. But most importantly, and I've harped on about this for a number of years now, I believe strongly that the whole country, regardless of the events of January 15th, 1966, where first blood was spilled, subsequent to that, a situation where one ethnic group, has 3 million people killed, including 1 million children during the Civil War. That same ethnic group loses 30,000 people in pogroms. That same ethnic group loses 300 officers in one night on July the 29th, 1966, in a revenge coup. And that same ethnic group has suffered immeasurably over the years. I think that we really do need to do something about that. If you look at the secessionist elements in the Southeast today, they hold on to that, in my view, quite rightly, and say, look, this is what we've suffered over the years. We need to be compensated, and we need to be acknowledged. And I think that would go a long way, reaching out, building bridges of love and support, forgiveness for one another. And we must also acknowledge this, and this is something that I think that I have to say here. The gallantry of our own soldiers during the Nigerian Civil War. We always talk about the other side, the civilians that were lost, and that is a tragedy, and I've always said it, I've emphasized on that. But the Nigerian forces themselves, the Nigerian soldiers that gave their lives during that Civil War, also have to be remembered, have to be acknowledged, and we all have to come together, forgive one another, and build a nation where tribe and faith, literally do not count do not come into issues of governance. Once we can get there and be fair to everybody, you will have a situation whereby secessionist elements will begin to, will not be as strong. We'll be able to come together as one to move the country forward, which is what I think we need to do. We need to forget our differences, come together, and remember that we're Nigerians before anything else. That's the way forward.
Well spoken. You have just enumerated the number of ways through which we can get to reconcile and all of that. But you see, how does it start? Who moves it? What should be the agenda? What will be the meeting point? Who will call for this meeting? How will it now permeate the nooks and crannies of the entire nation? Because it's easily said than done. How does an ordinary Nigerian begin to feel, okay, we're now reconciled, we're building a nation, I don't want to be sectional, I don't want to be regional, as the case may be. So that has been a central point that we have all missed over the years. That since after the war and all of that, we ought to have come together. I recall that Ojukwu once said in the early 80s that we should have a national conference. And everybody, almost everybody that mattered, was against it. Yet we had a national conference, remember, in 2014 and all of that. Now we are calling for reconciliation, which requires such a conference for Nigerians to sit. So how can this be done, Professor Adesina? How can we do a genuine reconciliation that will impact on the polity and the, by implication entirely on Nigerians?
Thank you very much. I am an advocate of the adoption of what you call a grand strategy, a high strategy. Nigeria has no grand strategy. And that's part of the problem we are sustaining in this country. Grand strategy is not Vision 2020, it is not policy, it is not, it's something that is higher. Have we attempted to create a Nigerian grand strategy? That's talking about vision, a long-term vision, where you put all your values, ideals, ideas together, and all this work coherently to establish a future that is much more inclusive and much more workable. Let's create a grand strategy. When Napoleon became emperor in France, one of the things he did was to say, look, let's start with the children. In our own grand strategy, we start with the children. It is just one aspect of the grand strategy. let's create the history books for them that they can read. Let's begin to affect them, influence them, talk to them about Nigeria. We are going to create a new Nigeria based on creating new values and orientation for these children. But we are not doing that. I'm happy you mentioned the issue of history back on the curriculum. You don't parachute history back into the curriculum, which is what they did. The same mistakes we made in the past that made history unpopular is also still going to be made. You need a much more strategic approach subsumed within the grand strategy to make history useful as a tool of nation building. So that's my answer. Let's create a grand strategy and let's see.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Adesina. Useful points that you have also raised, like the other guests. And I believe that those who are watching and listening can take advantage of ICT to begin to infuse elements of history. You have also embedded history in various courses and all that. General IBM Haruna, let's get your closing thoughts on this subject. Very briefly, how do we avoid the mistakes of the past?
Well, very briefly, I'll say that all these problems, strategy, doctrines, etc., has remained as academic because our governments have had recommendations on all kinds of issues. These recommendations were made by well-thought-of Nigerians, well-meaning Nigerians, but it appears they are not the one executing the recommendations. And those who are in charge are not concerned about putting the recommendations into use because of their own, perhaps, short-sighted desires.
All right, sir. At this point, we are closing our conversation on this edition of Good Morning Nigeria. I'd like to appreciate General Ibrahim Bata Haruna, General IBM Haruna, former Federal Commissioner for Information and Culture. Thank you for coming here this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right. And of course, former Minister of Aviation, Femi Fani Kayode. It's been wonderful learning a lot from you this morning from the historical perspective of what happened in 1966. Thank you. And from Ibadan, we had Professor Olutayo Adesina. We also like to appreciate your historical point of view on this matter. Thank you indeed for being part of our show this morning.
All right, that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. We don't have enough time to take our sports segment, but of course the program is back tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do take care of yourselves. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kyrian Umar. Have a great day.